Okay, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar today. We welcome students and their parents to today's webinar. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Alibad with us for the exciting topic of how is big data changing our lives. He's gonna share with us what is big,
914
how is our life changing.
6315.
Uh, Give me 1 second. Directions in large-scale advanced computing, cloud services, connectivity, and the future, and opportunities in the days of the pandemic. This talk will be a tremendous help for the high school and college students, and it's a result of a collaboration between STEM Matters and the Young Professional Society. STEM Matters mission is to inspire students to excel in science, technology, engineering, and environment matters by nurturing their critical and analytical thinking skills. And our sisters organization based off of UK, Young Professional Society, their mission is to help, support, and change the lives of youth by providing personal and professional development opportunities. So let me give you a brief introduction of Dr. Alibad. He is a professor of computer science and associate department head for faculty development in Virginia Tech University. He received his PhD degree in electrical and computer engineering from Purdue University in 2006. He's an ACM distinguished member. Dr. Ali's research interests are in distributed computing systems, cloud computing, edge computing, file and storage systems, Internet of Things, IO systems, and operating systems. At Virginia Tech, he leads the distributed systems and storage laboratory. Um, Dr. Ali, thank you very much for finding time out of your busy schedule. Over to you.
So thank you so much, Shakil. Thank you for the nice introduction, and it's very nice to see all of the people here interested in interested in finding out about how big data can make a difference in our lives. So let's take a step back, and before we jump into big data and cloud and machine learning and things like that, uh, if you have to, just let's look at an example of how we are consuming data. So in a typical day when you wake up, especially these days, I heard that different places are having different kind of unexpected weather. Um, so one thing you do is you open up your mobile phone or your computer, you look at, hey, how's going to be the weather today? And based on that, you may say, I mean, where I live, we say, okay, is it going to be snowy today? Is it going to be very cold? Are the roads going to be slippery? And I'm going to use all that information to make decisions that affect my day. Maybe I will dress up a little bit warmer. Maybe if it's going to be raining, maybe I will bring an umbrella along and things like that. So those are the kind of things we do without even thinking about how did all that information come together. And um, so how did all that information come together? And what's really happening, let's peel the onion a little bit and let's try to look into what's actually happening for us to make those decisions and what's actually happening for us to just click on our phone and be able to see, hey, is it going to be nice and warm today, or is it going to be rainy or snowy or what have you? And at the heart of the thing is an effort by different people, stakeholders, to collect a lot of information, to collect a lot of data. In the case of let's stay with the theme of the weather. So what's actually happening is that there are temperature sensors, wind sensors, there are satellite images of cloud cover. There are sensors about where different storms are forming. There are speed sensors telling us how fast the wind is blowing. So you take all that information, and just one point of information can tell you something like, is it windy outside? But um, if you do it again and again, and you do it across a large amount of data points, what you will end up having is a huge amount of uh, almost a trove of data that then you can use to do something with it. So let's say if you are able to figure out that throughout the southern United States, this is the temperature variation in the sense that you take temperatures maybe, let me just say for the sake of example, every 1 mile you have a temperature sensor. So you can imagine in your mind how you can create a grid of information that tells you this is where all the different temperatures are. And now add to it like where it's raining or not, how's the humidity level, how the wind is blowing. And what you will end up having is a massive amount of data that tells you specifically what's going on in one point. So that's the first step, which is the collection of data. And with just the collection, you can find out, and it already has information. I mean, if you were to look outside your window and you see that it's cloudy, that's just one data point, but that's enough for you to conclude that, oh, it's cloudy. Or if you see it's raining, you can make that instant decision that, oh, it's raining because you can see the rain and water falling. What is more interesting is that once you collect all that data, and it can become a lot of data, you bring it into some kind of computing, and we will talk about that in a second, that the size of the data matters, things like that. And you bring it into some kind of computing, and right now you can imagine that to be a cloud computing. But in a sense, it could be any computer, and you process that information, and then you try to model or guess. You say, hey, I have clouds in the east and the wind is blowing towards the west. So these clouds are going to be carried towards the west. So you can make a prediction that maybe in a few hours, depending on the speed of the wind, the clouds will be carried on to a different portion. And then based on like the sun cover and the humidity levels and other factors that come into play, you can make a prediction yourself. You can say, oh, it's going to rain here it's going to rain in that particular town at 4 p.m. And that's what's happening in these applications where data is being collected at an extensive and fine granularity. Lots and lots of data points are coming in. You bring that data in, then you process it, and then you start seeing patterns. And based on those patterns, and weather is a much better understood phenomena. So you also have models about when it rains and what conditions have to be true for a certain kind of storm to form. Or for some of us who live in places where you might be susceptible to tornadoes or hurricanes, you can use that information to build a model or make a guess. And you can say, oh, my data tells me that this is going to happen. And that's the prediction you are seeing as a layperson clicking on your phone, where it says, oh, you know what, it's going to be nice and 70 degrees later in the day. So this is one example of what you call a scientific or a big data workflow, which means you collected the data from the weather sensors, you brought it into the cloud or other servers to compute it, and then you made some predictions based out of it. So let's stay with this model for a second and let's try to identify how is this going to happen, right? Uh, all of you can relate to a very simple scenario, which is that if you go and take pictures, and each picture is kind of a data point, it's a visual image, it's a visual capturing of a status of some instance, right? So if you take one picture, and then you realize that with the amount of memory and data, that amount of capacity that our phones have these days, it's possible that we take hundreds or thousands of pictures. But then when you try to, let's say, back up those pictures, or you want to push them off to cloud, or you want to put them onto Google Drive or whatever, you realize that it takes time. If you have one picture, it takes maybe a few milliseconds and you don't even face it. But if you have like 10,000 pictures, it's going to take a while for those pictures to be uploaded to your backup, right? So that is a challenge because that's only happening with your pictures. But if you have hundreds and thousands and millions upon data points where you are collecting information and you want to push it off to some server, it's going to take a lot of time for that server to get that information where it needs to go. So that challenge is the data transport.
You're muted.
Yeah. So, Mr. Shakil, just let me know whenever you mute me. I will unmute myself.
No, I think it happened, but we didn't miss you too much. It was like 5
Okay,
seconds.
that's fine. That's fine. No worries. No worries. Yeah, I will keep an eye on the mic too. But as you will pretty soon find out that I get carried away. So if you don't see it, yes, please keep an eye on me. Okay. So what happens is that this is a very interesting challenge, because this is where you have to get lots and lots of information from point A to point B. And that's like, this is where you can think about, hey, I'm going to have 5G, or I'm going to have faster connectivity. And yes, those are good challenges. And those are like what you call the physical layer challenges, which is that do I even have capacity in my channels to get the data, to get the information where I want to go? Now, at the moment, let's not worry about that. I mean, like I said, it's a very hard challenge, and there are lots of engineers, lots of scientists and researchers who work on how can I pack more and more information in the same bandwidth. And if anything, you see that once in a while, those of you who remember what an E is on your phone, that was a sad life. And now you have moved on to like 2G and 3G and LTE and 5G and whatever the commercial things they want to call. And you can have speed of data, raw speed of data is through the roof, right? I mean, it says, oh, you can have ultra LTE and all that. So we understand that people are building bigger and bigger and bigger highways for data to travel. So actually, that's a great analogy, because if you think about it, if you go somewhere to your school, to work, and you just have one lane road, there's only so fast you can go because there are people ahead of you. If you have 2 lane road, you can go faster. And if I give you a 4 lane highway, you can go even faster. So I'm not gonna, that is a challenge, and you should build bigger and better highways. But I'm going to take a step back and say, let's say you have a 6 lane highway, very high bandwidth connection between 2 different points. Those of you who have driven and ever been in a car, you know that having 6 lanes is no guarantee that you can go fast. You can have mismanagement of the road, you can have an accident, you can have many things that can slow you down. And that's what happens. And one of the reasons that can happen is that just like a highway, there are these bandwidths that exist, but it's being shared between more and more and more and more people. If there was a place which had 500 phones, now there is 50,000 phones. In my house, my router, the other day I checked, and I have a lot of smart things in the house. I have like almost 300 things talking to my router. And those 300 things are not necessarily my laptop or something, right? Those are things that I have, like smart switches and smart things and sensors and, lots of fun stuff. The point being that the same thing is happening with our highways that we have built between the sensors or wherever is the source of the data to where it needs to go for processing. So there are lots of challenges in there about making sure that you can have a continuous and uninterrupted flow of information from your devices. And I just say devices so you can relate to it, but you can easily imagine change your phone with a temperature sensor, change your phone with a wind sensor, talking about trying to talk to our weather model, if you will. And all these devices need to be connected and need to make sure that the data is flowing into the cloud where you want to process it. So this one challenge, and I'm not going to go into details. I think what I'll do is like today, my goal will be to give you a little bit of pointers of the challenges that exist. And if it interests you more, I mean, yeah, sure, definitely, I'll be more than happy to chat with you to see if you want to dig deeper into these. Now, some of you might start thinking, hey, you know what? You are trying to bring the data to processing, right? So sometimes, when you're working on a project and you are on phone, I mean, and I'm assuming normal times, not right now. Right now is crazy. In normal times, there are some things you can do by staying where you are, meaning you are at your home, you're working with a project and your buddy is in their home, and you're able to manage with each other Maybe you send them a picture of, you say, hey, this is how the project is looking. You send them a picture, they look at it and they say, you know what, I think you need to change it. But that can only go on for a while. Very soon, your body's going to say, you know what, I'm going to come over because this is taking too long. You do something, you make a change, you send me a picture, you ask me a question, I'm just going to come over. So the same thing can happen in computing, where you say, you know what, you keep sending me this information, and this information then goes to the cloud, and you are telling me this highway is congested. How about me as a computing come over, come to where you are, bring the computing close to where the data is. And that's another next frontier. What we try to do in that world is that instead of taking all the data and bringing it to some central place, we say, you know what, we're going to take some portion of the central place, like computing power and what have you, and we're going to bring that computing power closer to where the data is. And that way, data doesn't have to travel a lot before it reaches some kind of computing. And some of you might start thinking, what's the advantage or what? So one of the advantages that, and an interesting way to think about information processing is like a funnel, right? Okay, I think, you know what, I'm going to turn off the, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn off the background for a while, because when I move, things disappear. Anyway, we'll see. If it becomes irritating to you guys, I'm fine with that. So you basically think of it as like a funnel, and at the top, the funnel is pretty wide. And when you have a pretty wide funnel, that's where all the data is coming in. And that's where you need a lot of bandwidth and a lot of things. But then you look at the data and you process it and you come up with some result. And that result is slightly smaller amount of information. And you do it for a while. Till the end, you just have very little bit of information, like a distilled information. So think of it this way. You collect temperature, wind, speed, humidity, all those things at the top, and maybe that's 1 gigabyte of information. Then you process it, you try to correlate, you can do things like, well, the wind speed over 10 miles per hour, 10 miles square area doesn't matter much. I'm just thinking these things out of, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter every 10 mile out, because I don't need 10 points. One of them is enough to represent. And I'm going to keep doing it till in the end, my answer is there going to be a hurricane or not? So that's a yes, no information. So I started with maybe a gigabyte of information. And in the end, I have just 1 bit of information, hurricane, yes or no, right? So if I sent you the raw data, it would have required me to send you 1 gig. But if I sent you the result, it would have required me to send you just 1 bit. So imagine how this can help you. That can make a huge difference, because if you can process something on the site where the data is collected, then you can do many interesting things. So that's another very interesting challenge. How do you bring the data, computing close to data? And this is where one model you will hear a lot about, something called edge computing or fog computing. The terms you will hear around this kind of processing would be, edge computing is, let me bring computing to the edge of where the data becomes available. And this is very important. I will come back to that in a second. Fog computing is there's somewhere in between. I mean, people just keep pushing the wordplay on cloud and stuff, right? So fog computing is kind of similar, where we're going to try to compute in the middle somewhere so that data doesn't have to be pushed all the way. Okay, one interesting thing that everybody's talking about these days is self-driving cars, right? And in self-driving cars, the challenge is not about the machine itself. You can have lots of computing in the car. It can look at the screen. It can detect the, it can detect the highway lanes, lane markers, stuff like that. It can detect maybe humans and all those things. But a self-driving car on its own can only do so much. If your self-driving car can talk to other self-driving cars on the road, it will make a huge difference, because then you don't have to detect and respond. You can coordinate a response. So you don't have to say, oh, the car in front of me is slowing down, so I need to now react, which is kind of dangerous because you're limited by physics. There's only so fast you can react to something you have just observed. Versus if you have like a whole bunch of cars talking to each other, they can strategize. They can talk to each other and they can make a plan. One common thing could be that if you know that it's going to be congestion ahead, all cars can slow down. Instead of coming to a halt, they can slow down a little bit and let the congestion ease out. You can go in this thing called like virtual road trains, where 5 cars can follow each other really closely so that the overall fuel efficiency of the cars goes up. Because if you're too close to the car next to you, you don't have to the wind drag goes down. I mean, it's very dangerous. You should never do it as well if a human is driving it, but you can very easily imagine self-driving cars following each other that way. Now, these are very interesting use cases, and sky's the limit on this world. But coming back, how is this going to happen? It's going to happen because each car is going to have lots and lots of sensors. You're going to process some data in the car. Most of the new cars have lots of processing powers, GPUs and stuff to make things happen. But at some point, they would need help from more computing. And many people are thinking, oh, what if we place strategic edge computing data centers along the roads? Or in terms of who's pushing it. So if you are a cellular service provider, you will say, oh, I will provide you computing at the control tower, at the signal tower, because each phone, each device needs to talk to a signal tower. And the idea stays the same, that if I can process some things for you very close to where you are, then I don't have to send that information all the way to some central brain. And that's a very interesting challenge for people. In terms of both, like, what do you decide locally? What do you push all the way to this cloud? And more interestingly, though, let's say that there is 100 of you, and some information comes to all 100 of you, and you are able to put your heads together and are able to come to a conclusion based on consensus that all of you agree. And then you can also do more if there is more of you. Now, if you distribute that number of people to observe something in parts. So I think a very interesting, like the old fable of the blind mice come into play here. So if you have 7 blind mice, and hopefully everyone has heard the story, and they are looking at an elephant, depending on which part of the elephant they are touching, they're going to conclude very different components about how the elephant looks like. And that can happen. That can happen in a way if you do not talk to a central entity, because your sensors which are talking to the trunk are going to define the elephant differently. Your sensors that are looking at perhaps a leg of the elephant or a tail or the body is going to make a separate conclusion. So one of the interesting thing that comes into play in this world is something called federated learning, which is that how do you learn? And this is a term which is used in machine learning and deep learning environments, where you are looking at how do I learn something without having the whole picture? And what can I do with the small amount of, like, a window of information that I have? Can I bring that window to, one, reduce the amount of data that I need to send to a central server or what have you? And the other thing is that can I help the central server by, so one is reduction, and then am I learning something useful? Because now all of you have seen an example of this. Pretty much all of you have used the smart keyboards on our cell phones, right? They come up with the words on their own. And one thing that you don't realize is that the words that are suggested to you, auto completion words that are suggested to you on your phone, is a function of 2 things. One, your phone is learning your habits. It's observing your habits and it's trying to see, okay, if I type one word, this is the second word I do. So in my case, for example, if I type band, my phone is almost always going to say bandwidth, because that's the word I'm typing a lot in my emails. In your, it could be different. It could be like a music band, right? It could be like, so one thing my phone is doing, and your phone is, all of our phones are interestingly doing, is observing what we do and is learning about what we are saying. But there is a problem, right? The problem is if my phone shared everything I was doing with some central entity, and then yours is also shared, then my privacy is shot, right? And I'm not talking about just us sharing with Google or something, which the privacy is short anyway. But my point is that if we start going beyond that, so people have thought of these problems about how can they make my life better by giving me more learned keyboard without reducing my privacy. So what they can do is, instead of sending all of my signal and hand gestures to some server, they try to make a local guess, they try to process this information, and then send some rules, like essentially there are heuristics that are derived. We're not going to get into that whole how heuristics are derived and how machine learning works. So that's a very interesting topic. I encourage you to look into it, but I think that's not the, we won't have time and a focus for today. But anyway, you can make up some heuristics. And what my phone is doing is it's learning from my behavior, exactly what I'm clicking. But instead of sharing that, it's coming up with heuristics. And the heuristics is that, um, in our phones, if I type STEM, the next word is probably going to be matters, right? Because all of us, so those are the kind of heuristics it's sharing. And this is an example of like a federated learning where different machines are learning on their own. But so federation here means that they have independence, they learn on their own, they do their things, but then they're sharing some of their lessons with another server, and that server can share the lessons back to us. So that way, my smart keyboard and all of our smart keyboards are not only a function of what we learned locally, because remember, to create these heuristics, there's only, no matter how avid a texter you are, the amount of data we as one person can generate for the keyboard is really, really small, and it can't do much. So you do need millions of people using the keyboard to come up with useful heuristics. So the approach here, the way it works is that it learns lessons from us, put those lessons together, and push some of those lessons to the cloud. And then in the cloud, there are servers that talk to each other. They figure out what are the important lessons we can learn from those lessons. And then they push those information back to us. And the result is it's a win-win kind of, in the sense that my privacy is preserved, in the sense that not every click I was doing was sent back to Google or what have you. And on the other hand, I do get some benefit of my autocomplete or my smart keyboard on my phone becoming much smarter than what it would have been if only I was doing it. So that's one idea we just talked about, which is that, hey, we want to have this pipeline of information, collect data, process data, make results. So one is about getting the data where it needs to go and processing it faster if you can, or bringing the computing where the data is. So what I'm going to do is take a breather here and check with folks if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll continue. So I don't know how to interpret silence here. So, okay.
Silence
so,
is
okay.
good.
Silence is good? Okay.
Yeah, they're
Silence is
following
good
it.
then. Let's talk about the next phase, where now you have brought your data, and like other challenges let me give you a quick list of challenges that can happen. One is, of course, that how do I get the data there, the speed, the performance. Other things are what happens if there are failures, what happens if there are networking failures, or what happens there is like corruption, meaning I said hello and it arrives as a totally messed up message on your side. How do we make sure this doesn't happen? The privacy thing I've already talked about. In the world of sensors, security becomes an issue, because if you are making a guess about weather, or you're making a guess about something, you want to make sure that the data that you're getting from the sensor is legitimate data. Because if that data is not legitimate, then whatever you will conclude from it is going to be wrong. And I'm just saying sensors, but there are other ways, right? I mean, things about all of us working on our computers, and we are creating uh, a sequence of information for people who can then process it to learn about our habits. I mean, that we hear all the time, where you say, "Oh, what you click, what you wear, what you click, where you went," all those things play a huge role in what kind of advertisement is shown to you. Now, I think I just saw something pop up about. What do you mean by data? Okay, excellent question. So any information that you can think of that you collect to make decisions upon is data. Data could be where you are right now, your location is data. What you clicked on is data. The last video I watched is data. Uh, so like so data means both the actual thing. So let's say, let me say it this way. If you took a picture, the picture is data, right? But more important than that is there's a bits of information associated with that picture, which is like, where was this picture taken? When was this picture taken? What was the camera setting when this picture was taken, right? Which phone, I mean, like if you use it like a phone, it will also say it was used with like a phone, like all that information, like in a more technical sense, it's called metadata, which means data about data, right? And it's very information. So those kind of information is very important to figure out what to do. One common example is if you are on your let's say if you're on your iPhone, you can see places, and it kind of pops up a menu, pops up a map, and it tells you all the places you have been, right? Something I personally enjoy because I've been everywhere. And but how does it know where the picture was taken? Because each picture, pretty much if you take a picture with your phone, is geotagged, so that geotag is information. In terms of a temperature reading, temperature is important, right? You all agree, right? But where is that temperature is way more important. The reason is, let's say you're detecting forest fire. So it tells you, oh, I'm detecting like 110 degrees Celsius. Now, that 110 degrees Celsius inside the oven making a yummy pizza for you is probably low, and you want to, but that 110 out in the forest in the middle of something is very dangerous. That means there's definitely an ignition somewhere and you have fire and things like that. So data itself sometimes become less important than information about where it was collected. I hope that makes sense to people, right? In the sense that it tells you information. So our data could be like a collection of information that gives you enough information to make a guess, make a decision, what's happening. Now, for some of us, like as humans, like if you see this picture, almost instantly, you know that there is a person sitting and they're moving their hand and stuff, and there are letters on the back of the background. But a computer cannot do this, and you need lots of information to do that. I see a hand that has gone up, so go ahead.
Sir, I have a question that, sir, how big data affects the environment, like a noise in a signal? It is a big issue for human healthcare, sir. So how we can handle these challenges, sir?
Right. So I think the same analogy applies, right? So let's say if you want to do healthcare, and let's assume for a minute that we can step back from privacy issues. So what you can do is you can collect a lot of information. Everybody who goes to the hospital or a doctor, let's say their temperature, you test for something, and that information is put into a system, and then you can make a model, and you can make a model about what kind of ailments people are seeing the most. And based on that model, you can come up with some analysis that, hey, obesity is a big problem, right? And then that can help you guide policy. You can know that, okay, if this is the problem, we need to allocate more resources for it. Not this year where people have been wearing masks and things and flu has not been that bad. But in the past, that's what will happen with flu. In the beginning, people will start showing up at doctors with cough symptoms and runny noses and what have you. And the doctors will start doing flu tests. And sometimes it will be like some common, your old fashioned coronavirus, like, your old common cold and whatever. And in that case, it's okay. But in many cases, you would see, oh, I have detected a case of flu. And those of you who have not paid attention, before Corona, I mean, flu is still a very big pandemic, a very big issue in the sense that it does affect health, public health way more than people sometimes realize. So those kind of information then gets collected, goes into a database, get analyzed, and people can then start making predictions about, hey, we are in the middle of the flu wave. And if we are in the middle of the flu wave, then people will say, let's start being careful. Let's not shake hands for a while. Let's cover our faces when we sneeze and whatever. And those kind of things you start seeing and then it gets distilled. And what you get to see as a layperson is an item in the news, either on your favorite web page or whatever. It tells you, oh, we are in the middle of the flu season, right? Now, same things can happen for more complex diseases, although it varies from state to state. And one of the reasons I was trying to stay away from healthcare was because of there are two things. There's technical possibility and there's policy possibility. So technically, you can detect all data from all patients in all hospitals and put them in a database and analyze it, and you can come up with very, very, very interesting models about, hey, what's going on. But the reality is a lot of that data is protected. So in the US, it's going to be HIPAA protected. In Europe, it's going to be even more. And I think as you go from I mentioned like one region to another, sometimes hospital system to another hospital, or country to a different country. Whatever you do, policy is a different animal, right? But technically, it's possible. Technically, it's possible to collect the data, see patterns, and detect things which are a little bit out of the ordinary. Those of you who are interested, you should go back and look at the work of a couple of scientists who were following this news of unknown pneumonia out of China back in the December of 2019. And those were among the first scientists who were trying to use big data and made connections that, hey, something is wrong, much before it just shot up and then everybody started looking at it. And the reason they were able to say, even in December of 2019, that something is wrong was because they were getting data about uncontrolled pneumonia, and they had data about what is normal pneumonia looks like. And based on that, and I'm just making it super simple, but reality is you create these complex models and you transform the data into a different dimension. Okay, let's not go there. But the point is, using computer programming, using mathematical models, using statistical analysis, they could see that a new pattern has emerged, and they didn't know what it was causing it, but they were extremely curious and they were raising the alarm that, look, we don't know what's happening, but we are seeing some results which cannot be explained with what we have known in the past. And lo and behold, those people were correct, as we know over the last 13 months of all that has been going on. So that's the healthcare angle. You mentioned the environment. Environment is at a huge, so my next step from weather would have been environment. Environment is a huge indicator. That's why when you talk to scientists, they start talking about, look, the reason we can provably show you that the temperatures are going up and the water levels are rising is not because we are guessing, it's because we have sensors all over the world and we study these things. And of course, these sensors on my airports have stopped cooperating. So these sensors are not necessarily 1 mile away, right? When you put them in the ocean, they might be like a couple of tens of miles away or something. There might be loopholes in there, but eventually you can collect all that information and you can show a pattern. And you can show a pattern that at least in the last 20 years, things are not going in that direction. An interesting thing you can do is once you have collected a data, you can build models and you can show, look, if I do this intervention, it can help you do something, right? So hopefully that gives you an answer. And I saw a question about skilled person. Let me quickly answer that question. Okay, Junaid has this question about bringing processing to data. How? Junaid, I mean, one example is, have you used filters, right? So when you use the filters, what's happening is the picture is being analyzed right on your phone, and then a filter is being applied. So that is process.
You mean the cat filter in Zoom?
Yes, the cat filter in Zoom. Okay, now you hold on. I should have done it with the right way, right? There you go. So like this filter, right? So this is right on the, I should not do this on the recorded thing, but anyway. So this filter right now, what it's doing is all this processing, it's detecting my face, it's figuring out where my eyes are supposed to be, and basically just laying out another bitmap laying out another bitmap in front of my eyes, and it gives us this cool effect. Now, the funnest part about this is something like this was nearly impossible to do a few years ago, and they're only possible because our phones have lots of processing.
But sir, leave it on.
I will. It will come back. Unfortunately, I do not have that particular cat filter. That would have been fun. So the point though is that this is an example of on-site processing, right? And this is possible. So the question was, what do you mean bringing the data processing close to the data? It's making the device, which is, so this phone, it's making the device that can collect information capable to do processing right there. Okay. Now, the difference, for example, is that, many of you have played games, right? So all of you know what this is, right? Now, this device, when Dr. Sameer and I probably played, was basically just a stick with a wire on it. And every other processing happened in the box. This device has brought processing closer to this. So it shakes, it does many interesting things. So there is a lot of, not a lot, but a decent amount of processing power right on this device so that it can detect, I should not have touched that. It can detect motion, it can do analog motion. You guys are better gamers than I am, but my point is, so that's one example. Yet another example is our example of self-driving car. The car, in the older model, people imagined the car will talk to something and all the data will go to that something. It will do some processing and come back and tell you what to do. So almost like a periphery. So, my hand, so let me give you an example. So I'm moving my fingers. Most of the processing is not happening here. I apologize to people who know more about how hands work than I do, but let's go with me for now. So if I move my hand, all of this processing is happening here. And all the data will something. It will do some processing and come back and tell you what to do. So almost like
your voice has gone low.
My hand. I'm not even talking. I think somebody else's mic is on. So there was a loop back.
Let me take care of that.
Yes. I started paying attention to that person. Okay, so if my hand is moving, the reason it's moving fast is because the connection from here to here is at literally the speed of light, so I can control and all that thing because heavy bandwidth. Now, if I try to change this with a robot, it takes a while. I mean, if you have seen those interactions where people are trying to do remote surgery or trying to fly a drone. I mean, if any one of you who has tried to fly a drone, you know the lag and the processing, what it can do for you. If you buy a $50 drone that is totally controlled by the device you have in your hand, meaning data is collected over there, processing is here, one mistake and that drone is gone. If you buy a $20,000 drone, which has lots of processing in the drone, even if you can't talk to it, it can safely keep flying and keep avoiding things. So that's like a very high level example of what bringing processing closer to data can do. So essentially, it means that you put computing resources like servers, small processors, things like that, closer to where you're collecting data. And because they are right there, your computer can work on it and you can make some decisions out of that information before you send it all the way to the cloud. So that was one question. Hopefully, Junaid, I've answered and given you some interesting ideas. And is there a lack of skilled worker creating skilled worker creating problem with big data? Yes, sir. I think that this is the field right now. I mean, I think that the science should be done for a little bit more fundamentally, because otherwise we get this problem of half-baked ideas. But having said that, big data is an extremely, I would say, burning hot field. Most of my students who have even taken 2 classes in it have been offered extremely lucrative jobs. So it tells you about the importance. Although, if you ask me as an advice, I would say it's never wise to jump into jump into a profession by just having taken 2 classes, because very soon you will learn that you can't. But you can't function, or you can do uh, you know you can do more interesting work, right? Uh, so I would definitely say that please spend time, learn about it, take a sequence of classes. Many universities have very good programs about big data analytics, big data programs. Keep 2 things in mind. I think if you jump into this field, you should spend a couple of years making sure that you have the computer science basics to survive the field. And then, of course, I mean, a 4-year program is excellent, where you spend like 2 years at the university learning the basics, and the next 2 years learning the tools of like statistics. So big data, good big data scientists, successful ones who are going to do interesting things, not just patch software up, are going to be people who are going to understand really, who have really strong grasps of computer science in terms of how to bring systems together. Mathematics, a lot of this world, I threw in this term right there, which was about, oh, you transform data into another dimension. And the engineers among us understand some of that, but all the young folks are thinking, what does that mean? And that's the kind of concept you need to clarify. I won't go into that right now, but that's what makes world easier for you to understand. So mathematically strong. And then, of course, you bring those things together, and then the sky's the limit. Right now, I have seen people take like, oh, let me take 1 or 2 classes and start working. And believe me, you will get a job. I'm not going to lie to you. But I think that the longevity of that job and your mental health in trying to survive in that job is not going to be worth it. So especially for young people, because you're looking for ideas to try. Big data does not only mean analytics. Like I mentioned, personally, I am on the system side of things, which is how do you build computer systems to support this? Okay. So go ahead, please. There was another question. I see a hands up. You're muted, say.
Sir, like data growth is big issue nowadays, sir. So how we can control this issue, like the data is going growthly, sir, day by day, sir. So how we can control this growth, sir? Growth of data, sir.
Right. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that at least for the foreseeable future, I don't see that there will be a control of the growth. Right now, the model is as much data you can make and collect it. The bigger challenge is that if you collect data faster than the speed at which you can process it, then it's a problem, because then you will never be able to go back to the information you have. So the challenge is more about, can you do real-time processing of information? Can you look at the data in real time as it comes in, process it, and then try to make a decision? So if you have done that, then maybe you can throw away the data. Although as a scientist, if you do an experiment, so let's say many of you must have heard about Large Hadron Collider. You have these big beams of new things that hit each other, and new particles are created, and you study them. Now, in an experiment like this, which costs millions of dollars to run, the norm is that you keep all the data, because you process it now, you find something, but you keep the data because it's possible that 10 years from now, scientists will have new models, and they may be able to go back to that experiment, the data that you have collected, and come up with new insights. So that kind of data, the scientist and me will be a hoarder and would not want to throw it away. Our digital lives are a big junk. They create a lot of clutter. Uh, Many years ago, if my dad took a picture, he'll be very careful with that 36 film. Each picture will mean something and will be taken in some time. Now I just keep the button pressed. And the other day I noticed that my personal pictures are more than 300K. I don't know, I'd even have time to just flip through them. And so I don't know, I think personal life clutter might change. The growth model of you will, at least in the foreseeable future, you will collect more and more data. Now, the challenges on that front is, where do you keep that data? So interesting topics for you to think about. There is concepts like DNA storage. People say, look, one strand of DNA can have the data, enough data to define this whole human being. So technically, once you can save encode information into the DNA, and then you can have terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data, maybe within one little thing. There is this thing called Microsoft Glass, where they are using this long chain polymers. And I'm not a chemist, so some of you might have heard about it. So very long chain polymers, and you can encode information in there. And then something like a 1-inch cube of glass can have tens of terabytes of information in it. Now, how you get it out and get it in is the challenge. Putting it in is not a big thing. There are other things where you can, so lots of people have thought about and thinking about, the information is going to keep growing. Where can we store it? Right. So those are the two very cutting edge things. Other things, the normal things you keep saying all the time, there used to be like a 40 megabyte hard disk, and now you can just click on Amazon and 2 TB hard disk will just show up. You can do 4 TB for less than $200. So it is becoming, and I'm not even talking about SSDs, but you can have tape storage. So the challenge then is that people will generate more data. Just imagine yourself, right? I mean, 10 years ago, what was your digital footprint? Just like you say, what's your environmental footprint? Think about it. What was your digital footprint? And what's your digital footprint today, right? And it just keeps going up and up. So the challenge for computer scientists and designers and engineers is, where do you keep all that data? And how do you make it cheap, right? And so those are very interesting challenges in storage systems research, where you think of ways to store data. Now, that's one thing. Now, there's also informatics and information research, which says, do you really need 50 pictures of me, right? And then there is the policymakers, right? That's a whole different thing. Policymakers who have nothing to do with science, but they have more to do with this, like ethical and philosophical questions. Do each and every of our action needs to be recorded? And I mean, those are, I don't have answers to that. I mean, whatever answers I have will be biased by my thinking, but those are like the next level of ethical questions, right? So I suggest one thing. I mean, in the interest of time, let me say this. As you go, and you are the next generation of computer scientists and engineers and researchers, and there was a time I can say, oh, my life is pretty good. I'm not a doctor, so it's not like I'm going to kill someone if I wrote 2 lines of code wrong, right? It's important distinction. This was something that will help me sleep at night, because I say, oh, what's the worst I can do? My program will not run. I will get a segmentation fault. It's all good, right? But if you were like a doctor or somebody, you have to be really careful, because one small mistake can cost a human life. So the tension or the pressure was very different. It is no longer the same. The code I write may be in your self-driving car, and if it does something wrong, it can kill you or kill somebody else, right? So the thing has gone up. The level of challenges that are associated with being a computer scientist now have also gone up, because we have to take on our role in the society as responsible contributors. And that's why I would suggest that as you study more about computer science and the technology, you should also think about and study what are the ethical implications of your technology. And that will help you design better algorithms. There's a lot of interesting work people have done where people say, look, if we collect a lot of data, let me say, I'm going to collect crime data. And based on the crime data, I'm going to make a model, and I'm going to say this town has, this neighborhood has more crime. Now, in these days, budgets are constrained. So if your local police department has 20 police officers and your model says this particular neighborhood has higher crime, you're going to say, let me put 15 of those officers there. Now, the problem is whenever you're going to have that, then you're going to have more petty crime being reported, maybe people not stopping at the stop sign, things like that. So it becomes a full self-fulfilling prophecy. The place that your model said has high crime is now seeing high crime because more crime is being reported. How many of us, when we were in our neighborhood, like close to our home, and just did a rolling stop, right? So those of you who understand what I mean, in the sense that you didn't do a full stop. But the point is that then kind of reinforces the bias and makes the life of our people difficult. Same thing can happen when you start using big data analytics to approve people's businesses. So for most of us who will be like considered professionals with it, and most of you young folks who will eventually have, in a few years, you will have a professional degree. The algorithm, if I wrote it, I will say, oh, what's a successful person? Oh, and I'll say, oh, a successful person is one with a college degree. So I can write software that will only approve your loan if you have a college degree. And then something like this is totally detrimental to somebody who doesn't necessarily have a college degree, but have huge and massive business sense. Think Bill Gates, for example, right? So these kind of algorithms that we write and process data and make decisions of our lives, you have to be careful, because now my biases and my edits and my changes can affect people's life. And so that's one important big difference that's happening between when I was going to school versus when you guys are going to school to learn computer science, that you have to be more responsible. The pressure on you is a little bit more. I see a question. Let me quickly jump to that. Are there any platforms available for young people to play with big data? Yes, I mean, I would say that there is lots of quick big data courses that you can get online. You can install things like Hadoop, you can play with it. Many of these tools you have to be careful, because many of these tools require at least 1 or 2 years of computer science. So I've been a little bit careful to not suggest something. I think the best time for you guys right now is to read about big data and practice your programming skills and basics. So one of the biggest problem people can get into is that jump over the fundamentals and start learning the applied. For this particular age group, my thing would be use the today's talk to motivate you towards learning this thing. But your time is best spent right now learning the basics. You need to be able to understand the basics of computer science, like data structures and how to put things together. And of course, fun part, like building a PC or whatever, those things are always fun and you should do those things. But having said that, if you feel comfortable that you have good basic skills, definitely then there are lots of interesting courses there. And what I will do is I will reach out to Mr. Shakil and Dr. Iqbal to kind of suggest some things. And I'll take it offline and maybe make some suggestions about what you guys can play with based on what they tell me about the basic skill set is, right? But on your own, yes, I mean, terms like look for Hadoop and look for Spark and things like that will give you an idea. Are there any free data sets in public domain? Of course, yes. So I think one of the common, so just put that thing in Google and tons of things will pop up. There is ImageNet, which is thousands and thousands of pictures that you can play with to try to do facial recognition. There is stocks data from last 20 years or 40 years or something you can play with. There's lots of data sets, public ones, private, public ones, free ones, the public to something that costs but is free to students, things like that. Yes, you have lots and interesting data that you can play with. Tell us about the jobs related to big data in computer science industry. Yes. Yeah, I mean, so anything, right? So data analyst is one of the jobs, right? Which means that you look at the data, you run tools and you try to make predictions, right? But that can be done in different fields. That can be done as a medical health expert, looking at data, making predictions about what disease is important and what disease need to be addressed first, like mitigation, things like that. It could be in drug discovery. I mean, right now, you would be amazed that a lot of work that happens on the front of, let's say, COVID and things like that. Yes, there are scientists who are putting these vaccines together, but there is a lot of data analysis going in when you hear a number that says such and such vaccine is 96% effective, where do you think that 96% number came from? It came from doing a huge study, analyzing the data, running it through proper models, and then coming up with a number which means something, right? Because otherwise, like, what does even 96% mean? And by the way, that's another example that, and that was not a question for me, I assume. Okay, yep, those are all the things I have. And that's all the questions I see.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Any other question by the audience? You can raise your hand, you can unmute and ask questions, or you can post them in the chat box. We just got another question in the chat box, Dr.
Okay.
Ali. Well, I think that's probably a comment.
That's more of a comment, yeah. Yes, and I agree. I agree. Actually, so that is actually true for many, many different fields also, because in terms of, I think a little bit more true, any field that was doing a lot of quality control and quality assurance, they work quality assurance, and for the young folk, quality control, quality assurance means that we are going to make something. Is it up to the standards, right? So things like if you're designing an aircraft, you have to do a lot of quality assurance. If you're designing a medicine, you have to do a lot. I mean, it's people's life at stake. So many of the industries that were doing extensive quality assurance and quality control, they were always collecting data, a lot of data to prove, sometimes to show they can do better, but mostly to prove that they are compliant. And now with data analytics jobs, with data analytics tools, what people are learning is that not only can we use that data to show, we can also use that data to uncover things we were not looking for. And that has been really a boon to finding things that people were not paying attention to. So think of it this way, many of you, I'm assuming a lot of you have used like visual programming environments, like if you took an AP class, it's like the graphic thing and errors come like, so there is, if you wrote code like me, which is just black and white screen, it's very difficult to see where you mistyped or something. But if you use things like Eclipse and you see other visual clues, if you mistype something, the thing just becomes red or gets underlined or something. And immediately you say, oh, there's something wrong here. That's what big data can do to your data. So you have a lot of data, almost like a sea of information. And by running the proper tools, it can raise flags. It can say, I see something here. This place is red. Those of you who have written code, or you have done, even Word, if you have used Word and your grammar check is not on, you are more likely to make way more spelling mistakes. But if you say, oh, hey, check the English spelling as I go along, I sometimes find that very irritating because it keeps suggesting funny grammar things to me, but at least the spellings. So you are less likely to make spelling mistakes because as you type, it's going to say, hey, this is not how you spell receive, the word I mess up the most. So the point being that the same thing, but that's easy, right? I mean, for Word to detect receive as a word, is very simple. Look up a dictionary, the word doesn't exist, sorry. But if you have tons and tons of information and what you're looking for is not well defined, big data analytics can also tell you, here is the sea of data. I think this block of information does not belong. It may not know why, but it's like one of those Sesame Street games, which is like one of these things is not like the other, one of these things doesn't belong, right? So the same thing can happen in big data, where it can look through the information, tell you something is amiss in certain block, and then let you focus on it. Right? So yeah, those kind of jobs are like everywhere, and they're popping up because they have such a powerful thing. Yes, so are there more tools? Yes, of course, every day there are new tools, new ways, new means, new things that are coming up. And that will always continue to happen in any field which has such a huge impact, because it doesn't just get limited to one domain. You can apply to any domain, right? From finding a funny My Alexa, my smart home has gone crazy. Okay, cool. Yeah, so yeah. No, so big data and cloud go together. The reason is that if you have lots of information, you need a lot of computing power to do something with it. So generally, a lot of computing power comes in two ways. Either you have access to a supercomputer center or cloud computing, which is essentially supercomputer available for rent. So that's why they go together. You can run big data on your, or like you can set up a little server farm at your home. Let's say put 16 computers, and there's some companies do that. Some companies do that, but generally it's not going to be viable for people like you and me. We are much better off just paying the cloud people so we can use their computing services. So it's not tied to the cloud, it's tied to lots of computing, and lots of computing can be done. Build your own servers like back in the day, go to a supercomputer, which is possible, but there's only few of them, or rent a supercomputer, quote unquote, which is the cloud. So hence, for all practical purposes, big data and cloud is tied together.
And if I may add to that, that many supercomputers in USA, at least, they are funded by public money by NSF. And researchers can write a proposal to the managers and they can allot you time to use as many clusters you want. Now, even many universities have their own supercomputers as well. So those who are already in West or those who are in East developing countries, they can collaborate. And that's another goal of STEM Matters, to find ways of collaboration where they can define some project ideas and get access to those supercomputers to run their code.
That is an excellent point. Yeah. So, Mr. Shkil, I think this brings us to the close. Yes.
Yes, I think we got a lot of words of wisdoms and nuggets from you. Very informative, very insightful talk, and interesting, because a lot of great examples that you gave. And I hope the students and the parents who are joining up, who attended so far with us, who've been with us, listening to this talk, would have benefited a lot and got some great ideas. So thank you very, very much, Dr. Ali. We greatly appreciate your time and your insightful thought to all of us. I'll wrap up with just a reminder for the audience. We at STEM Matters, our mission is to inspire students to excel in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and environment matters. And we do this by nurturing their critical analytical thinking skills. We coach and mentor middle and high schoolers, and we prepare them for the national and international STEM competitions. You can find more information about us at www.stemmatters.org.